There are three names that Jewish and Christian people have said together for thousands of years, like one long word. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You hear it in prayers and blessings, on the lips of Moses at the burning bush, and of Jesus himself. Three founders of the whole story, spoken in one breath as if they were equals. But open the actual book and count the pages, and something strange jumps out. Abraham gets around 14 chapters of Genesis. Jacob gets an enormous stretch of the story, wrestling angels, fleeing brothers, fathering a nation, and the man wedged right between them gets almost nothing that is truly his own. He speaks fewer words than either of them. He does fewer things. He goes almost nowhere. And there is one stretch of his life, the entire prime of it, 20 full years, that the Bible covers in a single sentence. So why does the Bible skip Isaac? Why does a book this careful give the middle patriarch the shortest, quietest, most passive life of the three, and then fast forward straight through the 20 years that should have been its heart? Because here is what almost nobody notices. Genesis tells you exactly how old Isaac was when he married, and exactly how old he was when he finally became a father. Put those two numbers next to each other, and a hole opens up in the middle of his life that is 20 years wide. This video is going to stand at the edge of that hole and ask what fell into it. Not to invent a secret life, but to read the silence the way the text asks to be read, and to find out why the most skipped patriarch in the Bible might be hiding the most important lesson of the three. And by the end, I think you will see that the Bible did not skip those 20 years, because nothing happened in them. It skipped them for a reason that lands a lot closer to your own life than you would expect. Let's get into it. Start with a pattern, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it, and it runs through everything Isaac ever does in the Bible. Abraham is a man who acts. God says, "Leave your country," and Abraham leaves. He argues with God over the fate of a city. He goes to war to rescue his nephew. He throws people out of his camp. He plants trees, he buries his wife in a field he bargains hard to buy. Jacob is the same kind of engine, only more so. He schemes, he bargains, he steals a blessing, he runs, he wrestles a stranger in the dark until dawn and refuses to let go. These two men grab their own lives with both hands. Now watch Isaac, and watch how differently the camera treats him. The first time we ever really see Isaac as a person in the story, he is not doing anything. He is being carried up a mountain to be sacrificed by his own father. He is the object. The wood is laid on his back, the fire and the knife are in his father's hands, and Isaac is the one tied down. The next major moment of his life, his marriage, he does not arrange himself. He does not travel to find a wife. He does not court her. He does not even choose her. His father sends a servant hundreds of miles away to pick a woman, and the first time Isaac appears in his own wedding story, he is out walking alone in a field in the evening, and the bride is simply brought to him. And then, at the very end, the one great act left to him, blessing his sons and passing on the covenant, he performs blind and deceived, his hands feeling the wrong son's skin, handing the most important words of his life to the boy he did not mean to give them to. Do you see the shape of it? In his three biggest scenes, Isaac is tied down, handed a wife, and tricked. He is the patriarch things happen to. And this is so consistent that scholars have a quiet name for him. They call Isaac the passive patriarch. He is the still point between two storms. And your first instinct reading it that way is almost to feel embarrassed for him, as if he is the weak link in the chain, the forgettable one, the placeholder between his famous father and his famous son. That is exactly how most people file him away. The one you skip, the bridge you walk across to get from Abraham to Jacob. But hold on, because that easy reading has a problem, and the problem is God himself. Because when God wants to name who he is, over and over, across the whole rest of the Bible, he does not drop the middle name. He does not say, "the God of Abraham and Jacob," and quietly leave out the quiet one. He says all three, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. At the burning bush, when God gives Moses the name that will carry the entire rescue from Egypt, he ties that name to three men, and Isaac is one of them, holding his place in the middle. equal in weight. So whatever Isaac is, he is not a mistake in the lineup. He is not filler. The book keeps him in the trinity of founders on purpose, which means the quietness is deliberate. Someone chose it. The question is why? And here is where I have to be honest with you about how this channel works, because the honesty is the whole point. The Bible does not hand you a psychology of Isaac. It does not stop and explain why this man is so still, so silent, so passive compared to the giants on either side of him. What it does instead is something much more interesting. It leaves gaps, deliberate ones. It races through parts of his life so fast that you can feel the wind of it. And it lingers on tiny details that seem to carry more weight than they should. And the biggest of those gaps, the one this whole video is circling, is a stretch of 20 years that the text crosses in a single stride without a word about what happened inside it. Let me show you exactly where that gap is, because it is hidden in plain sight, in two numbers most readers slide right past. The book tells us plainly that Isaac was 40 years old when he married a woman named Rebekah. That is a specific number, dropped without ceremony. 40. And then, a few verses later, after a sentence you could read in 3 seconds, the book tells us that Isaac was 60 years old when his wife finally gave birth to their twin sons. Also a specific number, 60, and almost nobody stops to do the subtraction. 40 to 60. Between the wedding and the children, there are 20 years. 2 entire decades of a marriage, of a man's physical prime, of the most important household in the covenant. And the Bible spends them in one sentence. Think about what a book this careful usually does with 20 years. In Abraham's life, 20 years is packed with covenants and wars and visitors and arguments and the births and banishments of sons. In Jacob's life, 20 years is the entire saga with Laban, 2 wives, 2 maidservants, 11 children, flocks multiplied by trickery, a midnight escape. 20 years is where the drama lives. And for Isaac, the book takes those same 20 years, the ones right in the center of his adult life, and it says, in effect, he prayed for his wife because she could not have children, and eventually she did. That is it. That is the whole account of 2 decades. So the question stops being why is Isaac so quiet and becomes something sharper, what was actually happening in those 20 silent years. Because they were not empty. A marriage was in them. A long, aching, specific kind of waiting was in them. And something was at stake in that waiting that was so large, so close to fatal for the entire story, that once you understand it, the silence stops feeling like the book skipping a boring stretch and starts feeling like the book holding its breath. Because for those 20 years, the entire future of the promise God had made to Abraham was hanging by the thinnest possible thread. And the thread was one woman who could not conceive. To feel how much was riding on those 20 years, you have to remember what God had actually promised Abraham, because the whole thing sounds almost absurd when you lay it against the facts on the ground. God had promised Abraham descendants like the stars of the sky and the sand on the shore. A nation, kings, a people so numerous no one could count them. That was the promise. That was the entire point of Abraham's life. The reason he left his country, the thing he staked everything on. And by the time Abraham died, do you know how many descendants of that promised line actually existed? 1. A single son who counted, Isaac. Everything, the stars, the sand, the nation, the kings, all of it, now ran through one man. And that is already a fragile thing, a cosmic promise balanced on a single life. But then it gets more fragile, because that one man marries at 40, and his wife cannot have children. The text says it plainly and quietly. Rebekah was barren, and with that one word, the whole promise stalls. Because if Isaac has no son, then the line ends. The stars stay unborn. The nation never comes. Everything God swore to Abraham dies in a childless tent, 1 generation in. The promise does not fail dramatically, with a war or a disaster. It just quietly runs out of people. And now, sit in the 20 years, because that is what the text will not do for you. and it is exactly what you need to do to understand it. Isaac marries at 40. His sons are born when he is 60. So for 20 years, this couple wakes up every morning inside a promise that is not coming true. 20 years of a wife watching her body fail to do the one thing the entire future depends on. 20 years of a husband who knows that the covenant of his father, the reason he was even born, the reason he was spared on that mountain, is stalling out inside his own marriage. 20 years of hope curdling slowly into something harder to name. Anniversaries with no child, neighbors with full tents, the math of a woman's body getting quietly worse each year, and the Bible gives all of it to you in a single verse. Here is the single verse, and I want you to hear how much it is carrying. It says that Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless, and the Lord answered him, and Rebekah became pregnant. That is the whole thing. One sentence of prayer, one sentence of answer. But look closely at the word for what Isaac did, because in the original Hebrew, it is not a soft, gentle word for saying a quiet prayer. The word carries the sense of pleading, of entreating hard, of a man wrestling something out of God over a long stretch of time. This was not one prayer said once. This was 20 years of a man on his knees over a wound in his marriage that would not close. The verse is short. The praying was not. And this is where the story quietly stops being only about Isaac, because if this pattern sounds familiar, it should. Isaac was born to a mother who could not have children. Sarah was barren for decades into old age, and the promise almost died in her too until God opened her womb and she laughed with the shock of it and named the baby Laughter. That baby was Isaac. So Isaac, the child of a barren mother, grows up, marries, and finds himself standing in the exact same crisis his parents stood in, watching the exact same promise almost die in the exact same way, through a wife who cannot conceive. And it will happen again in the very next generation, because Isaac's son Jacob will marry a woman named Rachel, and Rachel will be barren too, and cry out that she will die if she does not have children. 3 generations of founding mothers, and every single one of them cannot have children when the story needs them to. That is not a coincidence the Bible stumbled into. It is one of the most deliberate patterns in the whole book, and it is making a point with a quiet, almost stubborn insistence. The nation of the promise is never once conceived the ordinary way, by strong young people doing what strong young people do. Every link in the chain has to be given, against the odds, out of a womb that had already given up. The message underneath 20 years of Isaac's silence is that this people does not exist because human beings made it happen. It exists because at every step when it should have died out, something intervened. The promise survives on gift, not on vigor. And the 20 years are how you feel the weight of the gift, because you have to sit in the long, dark stretch where the gift has not come yet. But what Isaac does inside that stretch, or rather what he refuses to do, is the thing that finally sets him apart from his own father, and it is easy to skate right past. Here is that detail, and it cuts deeper than most readers expect. When Sarah could not have children, Abraham did not simply wait and pray. Abraham took matters into his own hands. He listened to a plan to have a son through Sarah's servant Hagar, and it produced a child, Ishmael, and it produced decades of grief and conflict that the family never fully escaped. Abraham tried to force the promise. Now look at Isaac in the same trap. The barren wife, the stalling covenant, the unbearable weight. And Isaac does not take a second wife. He does not force anything. In fact, in his entire life, Isaac is the only one of the 3 patriarchs who has just one wife, and no other women, no concubines, no backup plans. Faced with the same crisis that broke his father into shortcuts, Isaac simply stays and prays and waits for 20 years. And maybe that is the first real answer to why the Bible seems to skip him, because Isaac's greatness is not the kind that makes a scene. It does not look like anything from the outside. It looks like a man doing nothing for 20 years. But underneath, it is one of the hardest things a human being is ever asked to do, to hold still inside an unbearable weight, to not grab the wheel, to keep loving one person and keep trusting one promise while the years pile up and nothing changes. The Bible does not skip those 20 years because they are boring. It compresses them because that kind of faithfulness cannot really be narrated. It can only be measured. And the measure is the number, 20 years. Then, finally, the pleading breaks through, and Rebecca conceives, and the relief should be total. Except the pregnancy that ends the silence turns out to be the strangest, most violent pregnancy in the entire book, and it comes with a message from God that reframes everything Isaac thought he was waiting for. So the 20 years finally end. Rebecca conceives at last, and you would expect the story to exhale, to give this couple one moment of simple joy after 2 decades of waiting. It does not. Because almost as soon as she is pregnant, something goes wrong. And it is strange enough that Rebecca herself is frightened by it. The text says the children inside her struggled together, fought, crushed against each other so violently that she cried out. She feels a war going on inside her own body. And she says a haunting thing. She asks, "Why is this happening to me?" Or more literally, if it is like this, why am I even alive? 20 years she begged for this pregnancy, and now that she has it, it feels like it might tear her apart. And so Rebecca does something Isaac has been doing for 20 years. She goes to ask God directly, and God answers her with one of the most consequential little prophecies in the whole book. He tells her that there are not just 2 babies in her womb, there are 2 nations. 2 entire peoples are wrestling inside her, and they will be divided against each other for the rest of history. And then comes the line that turns the world upside down. The older will serve the younger. In that culture, the firstborn son was everything. He got the birthright, the double portion, the headship of the family, the lead role in the covenant. And God says, before either boy has drawn a single breath, that in this family, the order will be reversed. The one who comes out first will end up serving the one who comes out second. The twins are born, and they come out fighting. The first one out is red and covered in hair, and they name him Esau. And the second one comes out gripping his brother's heel, as if he is already trying to pull him back and climb past him, and they name him Jacob, which means something like heel grabber, or the one who supplants. And right there, in that verse, the story tips forward off of Isaac and onto his sons. Isaac was 60 years old when they were born. And from almost the moment they arrive, the spotlight the book had been withholding for so long swings past Isaac entirely and lands on the younger twin, Jacob, who will carry the next enormous stretch of Genesis on his back. And this is the thing I want you to notice, because it is the pattern of Isaac's whole life in miniature. Even the great payoff of his 20 years of prayer, the children he pleaded for, become famous mostly for what they do to each other, and for the son one of them becomes. Isaac waits 2 decades for these boys, and then the story uses them as the on-ramp to somebody else's saga. The middle patriarch does not even get to keep the spotlight on his own long-awaited children. He hands it almost immediately to the next generation. He is, once again, the bridge, the one you cross to get somewhere else. But that only sharpens the real question, and it is a question we have skipped right past in a rush to do the math on those 20 years. How does a person become like this? How does a man end up so still, so able to wait 2 decades without grabbing the wheel, so willing to be the bridge and let the story walk over him to his sons? People are not born that quiet. Something makes them that way, and in Isaac's case, the Bible actually shows you the thing that made him, near the very start of his life, in a scene so intense that it has haunted 3 religions for thousands of years. To understand the silent man who could wait 20 years, you have to go back to the single most violent day of his childhood, the day his own father took him up a mountain to kill him. You probably know the outline of the story even if you have never read it, because it is one of the most famous and most disturbing scenes in all of Scripture. God tests Abraham by telling him to take his son, his only son, the son he loves, Isaac, the boy the whole promise depends on, and offer him as a sacrifice on a mountain. And Abraham, in silence, gets up early the next morning and goes to do it. This is the event the Jewish tradition calls the Akedah, which means the binding because of what happens at the top. And almost everyone reads this story as a story about Abraham, Abraham's faith, Abraham's test, Abraham's obedience. But this video is about the other person on that mountain, the one tied to the wood. Because whatever this day was for Abraham, try to imagine what it was for Isaac. Here is a detail that changes the whole scene, and most people miss it. Isaac is old enough to carry the wood. The text says Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac, his son. Isaac carries the fuel for his own sacrifice up the mountain on his back. So this is not a small child being tricked. This is a young man, strong enough to haul a load of firewood up a slope, walking beside a father who is far too old to overpower anyone. And on the way up, Isaac speaks. It is one of the only times in the whole Bible we hear his voice as a young person. And what he says is almost unbearable. He looks at the fire and the wood and the knife, and he notices the one thing missing, and he asks his father, "Where is the lamb for the offering?" And Abraham says, "God will provide the lamb." And then comes the line that has broken readers for thousands of years. The two of them walked on together. They reach the top. Abraham builds the altar. He arranges the wood, and then he binds his son. He ties Isaac up, this young man who could have run, who could have fought off an elderly father with almost no effort, and lays him on top of the wood he just finished carrying. And Isaac lets him. That is the part the tradition could never get over. Isaac is not a helpless infant here. He is a young man who submits, who lies down on the altar, who does not resist. Abraham raises the knife. And at the last possible instant, a voice from heaven stops him, and Abraham looks up and sees a ram caught by its horns in a thicket, and he sacrifices the ram instead of his son. The boy comes off the altar alive. God provided the lamb, exactly as Abraham said. Now here is where the text does something eerie, and this is the detail I most want you to sit with, because it is the kind of silence this whole video is about. After the ram, after the rescue, the story says that Abraham went back down the mountain. Listen to exactly how it says it. It says Abraham returned to his young servants, and they rose and went together to Beersheba. Read that again and notice who is missing. Abraham returned. The servants returned. But the text does not say Isaac returned with them. His name is simply not there on the way down. He went up the mountain named in every verse. The son, Isaac, and he comes down not mentioned at all. Now, careful readers have argued about that gap for 2,000 years, and I am not going to pretend it settles anything for certain, because it does not. Maybe it is just the way the sentence is written, and Isaac walked down with them and simply was not named. That is the safe reading, and it might be right. But the ancient Jewish teachers could not leave that silence alone, and neither can most people once they notice it, because something about it is too strange. Where is Isaac? Some of the old traditions filled the gap with theories. One said Isaac was sent away to study for years afterward. Another imagined, in pure legend, that Isaac had been so close to death that he was taken up to paradise to recover before returning. These are not history. They are the same thing we see again and again on this channel, the human instinct to rush in and fill a silence the Bible deliberately left open. But notice what every one of those legends is reaching for. They all sense the same thing you feel reading it, that the boy who went up that mountain and the man who came down were not quite the same person, that something happened up there that the text will not narrate, and that Isaac was never loud again. And here is another silence stacked right on top of it, and this one is even harder to explain away. After the mountain, the Bible never again records Isaac and Abraham having a single conversation. Think about that. Before the mountain, they talk. We hear Isaac ask about the lamb. We hear Abraham answer. It is tender. It is close. They walk on together. And after the knife, after the binding, across the entire rest of both of their lives, the text does not give us one more word spoken between the father and the son. The next time they are even in the same scene is years later, and Abraham is dead, and Isaac is standing at his grave, burying him. A father and a son walk up a mountain talking, and one of them raises a knife over the other, and for the rest of the book, as far as the text lets us hear, they never speak again. I am not going to tell you exactly what that silence means, because the Bible does not. But I will tell you what it does to the shape of Isaac's life. The most intense thing that ever happened to him before he was old enough to be anyone on his own. He was the object of the greatest test in the Bible, the still body on the altar, the boy who carried the wood for his own death and lay down on it and did not fight. And whatever that did to him, he walks out of it into a life of quiet. He does not grab. He does not scheme. He waits 20 years for children without forcing a thing. Maybe, just maybe, the reason the Bible skips so much of Isaac's story is that Isaac's defining moment was one where the only thing he could do was hold still and trust, and that stillness became the whole rest of who he was. The man who could wait 2 silent decades was forged by a day when waiting, and not resisting, was the only thing between him and the knife. Watch how Isaac gets the 2 biggest things a man in that world could have, a wife and an inheritance, because he does not go and get either one. They are both brought to him. Take the wife first. When it is time for Isaac to marry, the story does not follow Isaac at all. It follows a servant. Abraham, old now, calls his most trusted servant and sends him hundreds of miles back to the old country to find a wife for Isaac from among their own people. And the entire drama of that famous chapter, one of the longest single chapters in Genesis, belongs to the servant. The servant prays for a sign. The servant meets Rebekah at a well. The servant watches her water his camels, exactly as he asked God she would. The servant negotiates with her family. Isaac is not in any of it. He is back home, in the land, doing nothing, while the most important decision of his life is made for him by an employee and a stranger. And then comes the moment Isaac finally appears in his own love story. And it is one of the most quietly beautiful and telling images in the book. Rebekah's caravan is arriving. And where is Isaac? He is out walking alone in a field in the evening. The old translations say he went out to meditate in the field at eventide. He is a man given to quiet, to solitude, to walking in the dusk with his own thoughts. And he looks up, and he sees the camels coming. And at the same moment Rebekah looks up and sees him, and she asks the servant who this man is, and when she learns it is Isaac, she takes her veil and covers herself. The whole thing happens in near silence. There is no grand meeting, no speech, and then the text adds a line that tells you what those quiet 20 years were really resting on. It says Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent, and he loved her, and he was comforted after his mother's death. Sit on that last part, because it quietly explains so much. He was comforted after his mother's death. Isaac's mother, Sarah, had died, and Isaac, this grown man, was still grieving her, still unconsoled until Rebekah came. He does not appear to be a man of appetite or conquest. He is a man of deep, slow, private attachment, a man who mourns his mother for years and finds comfort in one woman and clings to her. And that is the same man who, a few verses later, will refuse to take any second wife through 20 years of childlessness, when every custom of his world would have handed him an excuse. The tenderness and the faithfulness are the same trait. He loves quietly, and he loves once, and he does not let go. People mistake that for weakness. It is really a particular kind of strength that just happens to make no noise, and therefore makes no headlines in a book full of louder men. And there are 3 quiet facts about Isaac that you only notice when you line his life up against the other 2 patriarchs, and together they draw the same picture. Isaac is the only one of the 3 who never has his name changed by God. Abraham starts as Abram and is renamed. Jacob is renamed Israel after wrestling in the dark. But Isaac stays Isaac from the day he is named to the day he dies. Second, Isaac is the only one of the 3 who never leaves the promised land. Abraham came into it from far away and went down to Egypt. Jacob would leave it for 20 years and die in Egypt. But Isaac never sets foot outside the land his entire life. And third, as we said, he is the only one with a single wife and no others. No renaming, no leaving, no second family. He stays who he is, where he is, with whom he is. He is the patriarch who holds the position rather than the one who travels or transforms. Quick pause here, because if this is the kind of thing you want more of, the real texture of the Bible instead of the flattened Sunday school version, then subscribe. Every week we take one figure or one story people are sure they already understand, and we go back to the actual text and read what is truly there, gaps and silences and all. And stay with me, because after all this quiet, Isaac is about to get the one and only chapter of Genesis that is truly his own, and what he does with it tells you almost everything about the kind of patriarch he really was. Here is that chapter, and it might be the most revealing one of all, because it is the one place where the book stops and lets Isaac be the main character for a while. A famine comes to the land, just as one had come in Abraham's day, and Isaac gets ready to do the natural thing, to go down to Egypt where the food is, exactly as his father Abraham had done. But God appears to him and tells him, "Do not go down to Egypt. Stay in this land." Isaac obeys, and he stays, and God repeats to him, word for word, the very same promise he had made to Abraham. Descendants like the stars, this land, all nations blessed through your family. The covenant is handed to Isaac directly in his own chapter at last. And then watch what Isaac actually does with his one chapter in the spotlight. He goes and lives among a people ruled by a king named Abimelech. And because his wife Rebekah is beautiful, and he is afraid the local men will kill him to take her, he tells everyone she is his sister instead of his wife. Does that sound familiar? It should, because Abraham did the exact same thing twice, telling people that Sarah was his sister to save his own skin. Isaac is not just facing a famine like his father, he is repeating his father's most specific mistake, almost move for move, in the same region with the same lie before the same royal house. His one solo chapter is a remake, and it keeps going, because the whole chapter is like this. Isaac becomes rich and successful, and the local people grow jealous, and they do the cruelest thing they can think of to a herdsman in the desert. They fill in his wells, and here is the detail that says everything. The wells they fill in are not even Isaac's own wells. They are the wells Abraham had dug years before, that the same people had already filled in once after Abraham died. So Isaac goes around redigging his dead father's wells, the ones his father had dug and named, and the text makes a point of telling us that Isaac gave them the same names his father had given them. He is not making his own mark on the land. He is restoring his father's. He walks his father's ground, digs his father's wells, keeps his father's names, inherits his father's promise, and even repeats his father's sins. If you were looking for a man forging a bold new identity, this is the opposite of that. This is a man whose entire life's work is to keep and pass on what he was handed. But the quiet keeping was about to face its last and strangest test. Because the man who spent his whole life faithfully receiving what he was handed and passing it on intact is about to hand it on one final time, at the single most important moment of his life. And he is going to do it blind, in bed, and completely deceived, giving the weightiest words he owns to the wrong son. And somehow, that mistake is going to hold. Isaac grows old, and the way the Bible tells us he is old is by telling us he has gone blind. His eyes, it says, were too dim to see, and he decides it is time to do the one great official act left to a patriarch, the thing that will outlast him and shape the whole future. He is going to give the blessing, the formal, spoken passing on of the covenant, the words that transfer the promise of Abraham to the next generation. And Isaac intends to give it to his older son, Esau, the hunter, the outdoorsman, the boy he has always favored because Esau brings him the wild game he loves to eat. So Isaac calls Esau in and tells him, "Go hunt me some game, make me the meal I love, and I will bless you before I die." But remember what God told Rebekah 20 years earlier in the womb. The older will serve the younger. Rebekah has never forgotten it, and Rebekah is listening at the tent. So the moment Esau leaves to go hunting, she springs into action. She grabs her other son, Jacob, and she tells him to bring her 2 young goats, and she cooks the meal Isaac loves, and she dresses Jacob in Esau's clothes so he will smell like the outdoors. And here is the strange, desperate detail. She ties the hairy skins of the goats onto Jacob's smooth hands and neck, because Esau is a hairy man and Jacob is smooth, and their blind father will reach out to touch his son to make sure. She turns her younger son into a costume of her older son and sends him in to steal the blessing from a man who cannot see. And what follows is one of the most painfully suspenseful scenes in the Bible, and it turns entirely on Isaac's blindness. Jacob comes in and says, "Father," and Isaac says, "Who are you, my son?" And Jacob lies straight to his blind father's face and says, "I am Esau, your firstborn." And Isaac is suspicious. Something is wrong. He says, "How did you find the game so quickly?" He says, "Come closer so I can touch you." And he runs his hands over the goat skins and says the line that has echoed for thousands of years. The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. He hears the truth and feels the lie, and he trusts his hands over his ears. He is fooled by touch because he cannot see. He eats the meal, he smells the borrowed clothes, and he gives the great blessing, the covenant of Abraham, the lordship over nations, all of it, to the son kneeling in front of him in a disguise. And then Esau comes home from the hunt. He makes the meal. He carries it into his father, proud, ready for his blessing. And he says, "Father, sit up and eat my game and bless me." And Isaac says, "Who are you?" And Esau says, "I am your son, your firstborn, Esau." And the Bible gives us a reaction from Isaac that is almost frightening in its intensity. It says Isaac trembled violently, a great and exceedingly bitter trembling, and asked, "Then who was it that just came, and I already blessed him?" He realizes in one horrifying instant that he has been deceived, that the most important words of his life have already left his mouth and landed on the wrong son. And Esau lets out a cry. The text calls great and bitter and begs, "Bless me too, Father, me also." It is one of the most heartbreaking cries in Scripture. But here is the part that should stop you cold, and it is the whole theological weight of the scene. Isaac does not take it back. He does not say, "Wait, there has been a terrible mistake. Let me undo it and give the blessing to the right son." He cannot. He says of Jacob, "I have blessed him, and indeed he will be blessed." Once the word is spoken, it is out in the world, and it holds. The blessing is not a legal form you can void when you find the fraud. It is a released reality, and even the man who spoke it by mistake to the wrong person in the dark cannot pull it back. So the covenant of Abraham passes to Jacob. And notice what has just happened. A blind old man, tricked by his wife and his younger son, doing the single most important act of his life completely wrong, has nonetheless delivered the promise to exactly the son God had chosen in the womb before either boy was born. The older will serve the younger. It happened. It happened through Isaac's mistake, not despite it. Think about what that means for the whole question of this video. The most passive, most acted upon, most easily deceived patriarch, the one the story keeps skipping, is the exact hinge on which the entire promise turns from Abraham to Jacob, from the first generation to the nation that will carry the rest of the Bible. And he does it blind, he does it fooled, he does it while thinking he is doing the opposite. God's purpose runs straight through a man who could barely see what he was doing, and it arrives precisely on target. If Abraham shows you faith that acts and Jacob shows you faith that wrestles, Isaac shows you something stranger and almost more comforting. That the promise does not actually depend on the patriarch being sharp or strong or even right. It depends on God. Isaac is the proof that the covenant is carried by grace, because it survived being handed on by a blind man in the dark who got fooled. And then Isaac just keeps living quietly for a long, long time. Here is a fact almost nobody knows about the patriarch everyone skips. Of the three great fathers, Isaac lived the longest. Abraham lived 175 years, Jacob lived 147, and Isaac lived 180 years, longer than either of them. The longest life of all three founders, the quietest patriarch outlasted the loud ones. He lived long enough to see his stolen blessing come true, long enough that both of his sons, Jacob and Esau, finally reconciled and stood together at his grave to bury him. And even his death, The death of the longest-lived father in the founding story the Bible gives you in a couple of short verses and moves on. Quiet at the start, quiet in the middle, quiet at the end. Which brings us finally to the question this whole thing has been building toward. Why? Why would the Bible do this? Why give the middle founder the longest life and the fewest words, and skip the heart of it entirely? Here is what I think is really going on, and it changes how the whole silence feels once you see it. We have been treating the skipped 20 years and Isaac's whole quiet life as a problem to solve, as if the Bible must have left something out by accident and we have to go find it. But what if the skip is not a gap in the story? What if the skip is the story? What if the Bible is telling you something true and important, precisely by refusing to fill those years with drama? Because think about whose life actually looks like Isaac's, not Abraham's. Almost nobody gets to argue with God and win wars and change the world, not Jacob's. Almost nobody wrestles angels in the dark. But Isaac's life, the long, quiet marriage, the years of waiting for something that will not come, the keeping of what your parents handed you, the private grief, the ordinary faithfulness that makes no scene at all, that life is the one that almost every single person watching this is actually going to live. Because your life has skipped years too. Think about your own story the way the Bible tells Isaac's. If someone wrote the book of you, they would linger on a few big scenes. The day you were born, maybe the day you almost died, or the day everything changed, the loud chapters, the Abraham chapters and the Jacob chapters, but most of your actual life is not those days. Most of your life is the 20 years in between, the long, ordinary middle, the decade of going to the same job and coming home to the same people, the years of a marriage where nothing dramatic happens, you just stay. The seasons of praying for something, a child, a healing, a change, that does not come for a very long time if it comes at all. If someone wrote your book, those years would be one sentence too. He worked and loved his family and waited, and eventually things changed. 20 years in a line. And the temptation, when you are living inside one of those skipped stretches, is to believe that it does not count, that your real life is on hold, that nothing important is happening because nothing dramatic is happening, that the meaningful part is the loud part, the visible part, the part worth putting in the book, and this long, quiet middle you are standing in is just dead time you have to cross to get to the next real thing. That is the lie Isaac's life quietly kills. Because here is what was actually happening in Isaac's skipped 20 years underneath the surface, where no story could see it. The entire promise of God was being carried. The covenant that would become a nation, that would run all the way down to the prophets and the kings, and eventually, for Christians, to Jesus himself. That whole future was being kept alive in a childless tent by a man who just would not stop praying and would not stop loving his wife and would not force the outcome. Nothing was happening, and everything was happening, both at once. Look at what God chose to build his promise through. He did not run it only through the mountaintop people, the ones who act and wrestle and make history. He deliberately ran it through the middle, through the man whose whole contribution was to receive faithfully, keep quietly, and pass on intact. And the Bible keeps Isaac in the sacred phrase, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as an equal, precisely because the keeping is as holy as the starting. Somebody has to hold the line in the long, unglamorous stretch where nothing seems to move. Somebody has to stay married through the barren years. Somebody has to re-dig the old wells and keep the old names and refuse to let the promise die of neglect in a generation that could easily have dropped it. That is not the boring part of the story. That is the part the whole story depends on. Abraham could start the promise and Jacob could carry it forward, but only because, in between, a quiet man refused to let it fall. And I want to speak to some of you directly now, because this is where an old story about a quiet man reaches across 4,000 years and puts its hand on your shoulder. If you are in one of those skipped stretches right now, The long wait, the ordinary years, the season where you are praying for something that has not come and wondering if your real life is ever going to start. Then Isaac is the patriarch for you. Not Abraham, the hero. Not Jacob, the fighter. Isaac, the one who waited 20 years, the one who loved one person and stayed, the one whose faithfulness was so undramatic that the Bible could only measure it, not narrate it. Your skipped years may be carrying far more than you think. They may be the exact place where the most important thing you will ever do is quietly getting done, which is to stay, to keep, to trust, and to hand on to the people after you, something you refused to let die. So the answer to the question we started with turns out to be the opposite of what it looked like. The Bible does not skip Isaac's 20 years because they did not matter. It skips them because what happened in them cannot be shown, only trusted. You cannot film 20 years of faithfulness. You can only compress it into a single sentence about a man who prayed and would not quit, and let the reader who has lived through their own silent decade understand exactly how heavy that one sentence really is. Isaac is the founder of a kind of holiness that never makes the highlight reel, and the fact that God put him right in the center of the three and never once dropped his name is the Bible's quiet way of telling you that the skipped part of your life is not the part God skips. Which brings us all the way back around to where we started, to a scroll with 2 dense columns and 1 short line, and a question about the man in the middle that turns out to have been about us the whole time. We started with something that looked almost like a flaw in the Bible. 3 founders spoken in one breath, but one of them handed a life so quiet, so passive, so skipped, that you wonder why he made the list at all. Abraham, the man who acts. Jacob, the man who wrestles. And Isaac in the middle, the man who is bound and married off and deceived, the man whose entire prime, 20 full years, disappears into a single sentence about prayer. But we did the harder, better thing. Instead of treating the silence as a mistake, we read it, and what we found was not a weak patriarch propped up between 2 strong ones. We found the founder of the quiet life. The man who shows you that faithfulness in the long, ordinary middle, staying when nothing changes, keeping what you were given, trusting a promise through decades of silence, is the quiet thing the whole story actually rests on. Isaac is the proof that the promise of God is carried as much by the people who keep it quietly as by the ones who start it loudly, and that a covenant can pass through a blind man in the dark and still land exactly where it was meant to. That is the whole reason this channel exists. To open the book back up and read what is actually on the page, especially the quiet, skipped over places where the truth turns out to be closer to your own life than anyone ever told you. So here is the thought to carry out with you. The next time you feel like your real life is on hold, like you are stuck in one of those long stretches where nothing important seems to be happening, remember the man the Bible skipped. Remember that his skipped years were the years the whole future was quietly being kept alive. And remember that the God who founded a nation chose to do it not only through the ones who made scenes, but through a still, faithful man in the middle whose greatest act was to wait and to love and to not let go. Your skipped years may be the truest part of your whole story. If this made you see the quiet patriarch with new eyes, subscribe, because the story does not stop here. It runs straight into his sons, because that stolen blessing, the one Isaac gave to the wrong boy in the dark, sets off the most dangerous family feud in Genesis. Jacob has to run for his life from a brother who wants to kill him, and he spends the next 20 years in exile, being tricked exactly the way his father was tricked, before one terrifying night when he wrestles a stranger by a river and comes away with a limp and a new name. That is where this goes next, and it is even stranger than it sounds. And the video on screen right now goes back to the beginning of all of it, to Isaac's father Abraham and the promise that started this whole line. Go ahead and click it. I think you will want to see where it began.